My name's Matt Kistler, and hi. That's what my name tag says here. Today we're going to continue on our walk through different spiritual disciplines. So if we kind of zoom all the way back to this year, we're talking about the gym as a metaphor for how we each need to take responsibility and as a community can work together to strengthen our spiritual muscles, and how there are different things we can do. There are different practices or tools that we have, different workouts that help us to think about how do we connect with God. And we embarked on this spiritual discipline journey based on a book by Richard Foster called A Celebration of Discipline, which I've enjoyed and would recommend. Looking at these different pieces of Christian discipline with the lens of these are tools. I think sometimes when we think of discipline, we think of like rules or like have-tos. And to me, part of the point of the Celebration of Discipline book is putting it in a context of these are tools of how we connect with God. And we've already talked about meditation and solitude and confession. And today, we kind of have a biggie. It's submission. And not only is it, in some ways, a pretty critical piece in any way that we follow Christ. You can have a pretty healthy relationship. You can connect with God without solitude. It helps. But I think I've seen people do that. At some point, if you aren't submitted at some level, if you don't understand submission at some level, you're just not following Christ. So there's that. And then there's the other piece, which is when done wrong, submission is one of the most harmful, one of the most toxic parts of kind of church culture or just in the world generally. People use submission in really negative ways. And my expectation is that when you see submission on the screen, many of you are taken back to an experience where you were maybe asked to or required to submit to do something you didn't want to do. And the justification was, well, Christ tells you to submit, the end. And I don't think that's quite it. And I think we all have to, we carry our own experience, but part of what I heard in what Tracy was sharing is we need to be able to keep bringing new eyes on what is Christ actually saying. We can't just ignore that submission. It's a big piece of the biblical narrative. It's a big piece of our walk with Christ. And even though it's been done so poorly so often, we still need to figure out what is the jewel in the midst of the manure pile. So, what a great way to start a sermon. I'm going to start with two primary verses. Like I said, as I kept kind of writing and thinking about this sermon, every point I was making, I'm like, well, there's this verse and there's this verse. It's just such a key piece. But today, there we go. I got my clicker because I didn't want to submit. I wanted control. This was a quote by Richard Foster in his book, and it really hit me, and I thought it was a good way to get started. Submission is Christ inviting us into a life where we give up the everlasting burden to always get our way. I'm just going to drop that there. We'll get around to that. But when I read that, I thought, now that is interesting. How much do we spend our time and energy and emotion trying to get our way? And what if submission is unlocking that door so that we can find joy and peace and contentment even when we're not getting our way? All right, two verses. I want to start with these. Luke 22:42 and Ephesians 5:21. Quick, easy, fit in one slide. From Luke, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. This is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he was about to be killed. And it wasn't a one-off thing. This was how he lived his whole life. What we see in this recorded ministry was a constant orientation toward what God wanted for him. That was Christ's example. And then Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, often in this passage, you may know Ephesians 5:22, or any of the rest of, I think Ephesians 5, maybe even Ephesians 6, where it says things like, wives, submit to your husbands, and slaves, submit to your masters. I think all this morning I've been thinking, this is like a 5-part series. There's a lot I can't really unpack, and I'll get to what I get to, but just know, you could talk a lot about that element of it, but I think what's important is to recognize that this is the first part of that section. This is the overarching thought, I believe, that Paul was trying to communicate. We submit to one another. Why? Out of reverence for Christ. What does that mean? Christ submitted. We honor him by submitting in the same way to one another. Okay, so then we better understand what Christ's submission looked like. What are some of the elements of that submission? If we're going to reflect it to honor him, how do we submit to one another like Christ submitted to us? All right, so a couple ideas. I thought about putting animations here and trying to make them come one at a time, but I wasn't that fancy. Christ's submission was not compulsory. I think this is such, you can't understand this idea of submission through the lens of the Bible if you don't get this. Of all the discipline, like I said, this is where we get it wrong. Christ was always given a choice. It was never, you must submit. And I don't really hear him saying, you must submit to us. I talked a few sermons ago about this idea that I called improvisatory righteousness. Essentially figuring out what the right thing to do is, not by looking to a rule, not by saying, I will find the one verse in the Bible that tells me exactly which side of the road to drive on in this moment. The Bible, the instructions, our experience with Christ, help us build a moment-by-moment relationship where we are listening and receiving and understanding the right thing to do in that moment. And it's not going to be something a checklist that we're going to write down and say, like, okay, in paragraph 5, it says I need to follow the speed limit in this situation. You have to experience life and listen to God moment by moment. And in the same way, I believe that's how submission works. Christ was connected to God's will. But the hard part is that means we don't have clarity where we can say, always submit here, never submit here. The more I was trying to wrap my head around this idea of what's good submission and bad submission, I literally came up with nothing. I have no idea how to tell you, in this kind of situation, submit, in this kind of situation, don't submit. I wrap my head around it. And every time I'd say, like, never submit in this, I'm like, well, that's basically what Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's like, people weren't submitting to him. They didn't have what's good for him in mind. It was terrible for him. He was in danger and in pain and suffering. But I don't think he's saying everyone else needs to do the same thing and just say, kill me. I think there are many situations where you're in danger. God's saying, get out of danger, right? And how to differentiate those two, I don't have words to say this is the way. And again, this is the point I'm trying to make is I can't tell you. It has to come through this relationship. It's not just what you want to do, because submission is about, well, you're not going to want to do it. But you need to have a way to kind of like mediate these two conflicting ideas. It's like, sometimes it's good to not do what you want to do, Sometimes it's actually very good to do what you want to do. And sometimes there's a whole thing that you're not even aware of that is probably the best way forward. So we need to be in connection with God. It's the only way forward. Okay, that was a long point one. Point two, submission made Christ downwardly mobile. This is like the other biggie that kept coming to me. When you are thinking about how will I submit, or around submission, if you're ever coming to a place of using submission to elevate yourself, that's not Christ. That's the opposite of the direction we're trying to go. And to me, Philippians 2, 3 through 8 really encapsulates this so well. This is what it says. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, not throwing out your interests, but not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human forms, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Our goal isn't to see who can submit to us. That's not the mind of Christ. Christ, the one who most deserved our obedience and submission, he didn't take that on. He came to us as a servant. He rules by serving. So, because of this downward mobile perspective of looking, how do I get down? How do I get beneath? If I ever see someone who has less power or less influence or is shut out or ignored or has no voice, my first response should be, how do I lift them up? That's the submission that Christ is embodying and wants us to reflect. Because that is so weird and hard and works so much against the way of the world, it's generally just not socially appropriate. We're going to be doing things that the world outside says, why are you doing that? Let me give you some examples. Well, starting in John 13, Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Peter outright refused because just how inappropriate it was. Like, we kind of think of it as like, ooh, it's this kind of neat, like, spiritual thing they were doing. No, this was gross. It's like, I don't know, for us, like wiping someone's butt. Like, it's just not great. You would never want your respected leader to say, let me do this for you. Right? It's just weird. That's the kind of freak. Yeah, I never even thought of that. I'm not going to say it again because we're going to get. But that's how uncomfortable that situation was. It bothers people. Jesus wasn't interested in the recognition or the comfort or the perception. He wasn't afraid to look like a fool in the purpose of lifting others up, to showing them how low he could go. How could you do this? This seems impossible. Like when it put on ourselves, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, there's so many barriers to downward mobile, socially inappropriate, and then choosing to do it. Like, you don't have to do it. I'm just going to choose to go over and serve you. How can you do that? Because Christ knew who he was. He had such a firm sense of his identity and to what he was submitting to ultimately. In that John 13 passage, I'm always struck by verse 3 that says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under him, under his power, and that he had come from God, was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. That's when he washed their feet. How did he do it? He knew where he was from. He knew where he was going. He knew who he was. He was secure in his relationship with God. And that's how he had the freedom to be able to submit to others through that connection with God. The fear of looking foolish, of losing power, of being diminished in the eyes of others, of being treated disrespectfully. He was able to move past all of that and confidently serve those who were very clearly less than him. Even during his betrayal and execution, he had every opportunity to seek safety, to use violence, to use all sorts of means to get what he wanted. But he didn't. He submitted to God's will. How? Because he had a confidence in his Father's love that was greater than his fear. He knew his belovedness. He trusted that God would faithfully care for and love him. And that freed him to set aside what he wanted and pick up something better. So that's Christ's example. That's the example of submission that we are invited to be a part of. So, how do we do it? What does that look like for us? Again, another verse that kind of makes this transition idea. Matthew 16, 24, 25. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save their life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. This is so hard. These are words we say and ideas that we kind of can assent to, but actually saying, I am going to set aside what I want in this moment and do something else that God is encouraging me, drawing me toward, that is tough work. And to make matters worse, the socially appropriate element of it, the air we breathe is in contradiction to submission. I mean, and I think, and I'm not picking on our culture, it's just the way it is. I think there are some cultures where serving others for the greater good is kind of more ingrained. Our national narrative is very much about rugged individualism. It's about getting what we want, and that's what makes everything work. It's me first and us first. That's kind of part of our mindset. Capitalism. Again, this isn't a knock on capitalism, but the way it's structured is everyone fights for what they want, and everything works out. It's just kind of the basic logic. Everyone fights for profit, and by fighting for profit, it makes everything efficient. That's the idea of the market. We have symbols of cowboys, right? Individuals who do what they want, when they want. And these are our heroes. They decide when to follow the rules and when not to. They are loyal to their own sense of truth. They get what they want. I see this in myself, like in our obsession with sports as a culture. We compete with one another to determine who wins and loses. So I get what I want, and even if it comes at the cost of someone else, I'm rooting on that, like, it's us, not you, right? Our political identities. I heard a quote of someone saying recently, it's not about uniting, it's about winning, right? If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. Whatever. We don't even necessarily know what winning or losing is, but whatever you're for, I'm against, just because, that's how our teams work. Sacrificing what's good for the greater good, that's just loser talk. How we think about really every aspect of our lives. What we're told is that we fight for what we want. But my message to you today is that self-centeredness cannot even give us what we want. It never delivers the control we want because the world keeps changing. It never delivers contentment because we always want more. It never brings peace because there's always somebody ready to jump on behind us. We're climbing a ladder, and even if I'm at the top, that means everybody else is below me trying to rip me down. That is not a world that actually brings fruit and life. So, we have these as our challenges. This is the context, the environment that we're in. So we have to do something pretty radical to act differently. I mean, this is going to be one of the differentiators between am I following Christ or not? Because it's going to look pretty different. There's a lot of places where it's like, oh, well, we're all kind of nice to each other, and I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, maybe you're not a Christian, but we're all kind of good people here. This is something that if we pursue this, there's going to be people who are like, what are you doing? Like, this is weird. So, welcome. Now, how do we do it? What does this submission, where do we go from here? Richard Foster talks about 7 acts of submission as like different kinds of submission we might be called to from time to time. And the way he breaks it up by is, who are we submitting to? I kind of grouped them a little differently because I thought it was unnecessary to break it into 7. But first, our primary submission is to God and God's word. And I think this is where kind of the rubber hits the road. We talk about a center-set community as one that is centering on Christ. I think, this is my personal opinion, I think it's very hard to honestly center on Christ if we say, I will only do what Christ says if it's what I want to do. It's just not generally going to work. And I know as a church, we look at the Bible differently than many churches. But I think there's an element of, as we read Scripture, and the Holy Spirit helps us to interpret it or make meaning out of it, which I think can be very different, there's a heart attitude of saying, am I willing to honestly do what I hear the Spirit speaking through this passage? If it says in that moment, don't do this, am I willing to give up something, change myself for the sake of that word, of that living word? That's the first submission. And I think that's kind of our guiding North Star. But then, how do we live it out? Usually that submission is lived out through service to others, right? It's doing something that someone else wants you to do that you don't really want to do. And so there's different areas that could be. Family, neighbors, and the church are ones that Foster kind of highlighted. Essentially, the people closest around you, the people you're interacting with. What are some examples? Welcoming family members who see the world differently into your home, even though it feels uncomfortable. That could be it. Again, these are all examples of what it could be. And again, there might be times where this is good. There might be times when this isn't a good idea. But just to kind of give it concreteness. Fighting for your spouse's flourishing. Staying at home while they go back to school. Supporting them when they take a new direction. Participating in a hobby of your kids that you don't care for. Limiting a hobby you want to do so that you have more times to do chores for your family that they don't want to do. For your neighbors, maybe it's watching your neighbor's kids or lending something to somebody that you're not sure if they're going to give it back. Not, this might sound more specific, not playing baseball behind a neighbor's house when they ask you to, even though you think they're being a jerk about it. Very specific. I don't know where that came from. In the church, I think about, when I thought about, like, what does it look like to submit to the church? And this is such a fraught situation. I'm just not even going to go into, like, there's a lot there. But when I was praying about this, I was just thinking, I think of Debbie, someone who's willing for free to take care of our money and do it well. I think of Tony, who takes care of our building and does it well as an act of service. I think she's out of the room. I wasn't planning on, like, calling people. But, like, I thought of Shar and just, like, her heart of hospitality and welcoming people. Yeah, you're out there. I think often when we think of submission to the church, it's like, well, the elders always are going to say this, and then you have to do it no matter what. And if you're not, you're kicked out of the church because you need to submit to the church. You know, like, that's a whole nother sermon. And probably at a different church. But I think we still have opportunities and ways to submit. And there's even a moment to say, you know, I trust our elders. And if I don't understand fully this direction we're taking, I'm going to give extra grace here. That can be submission too. So that's kind of our day-to-day. And some of those things can be maybe not very painful, maybe mildly inconvenient. The deeper challenge that I saw on Foster's list was the last one. How do we submit to the broken and despised? In every culture, in every setting, there are broken and despised people. People who are just pushed out, silenced, ignored, not given the time of day because they don't have anything to offer to us. They're a drain. It would be better off if they were gone, right? If we take the attitude of Christ of getting lower, we can't participate in that silencing. We're called to find a way to submit to them. And that is deeply uncomfortable. This is very specific because I'm just going to tell it as a story. Just 2 weeks ago, I was walking through Downingtown in the evening with Steph. And I was thinking about submission because this is how my brain works. And we saw a guy that probably was drunk or high, kind of wandering a little aimlessly. And he came up to me and said, "Hey man, do you have any change?" And I felt so relieved that my pockets were empty. And I was just like, nope, see you later. And I just kept walking. And as I was reflecting when I got home, I was thinking, I could have offered him something, attention. I didn't have anything I needed to do. I could have said, is there something I can help you with? Would you like to talk? But I wanted him out of my sight as quickly as possible because it was uncomfortable to be in that situation for me. And again, I'm not saying you have to give people to people, anyway, that's a whole nother sermon. But, there's all kinds of elements there. But in that moment, I realized I missed it because I could have offered him something. And I didn't want to submit my feeling comfortable to meet his need. So this is just such a challenge for us, but this is the call. This is the way. So, again, I tried to come up with a list of do this, don't do this. And I just really struggled. So this is kind of the closest I could come to. I have no idea. I've just been ad-libbing half of this. So if I had to summarize, I would say, what are the main points? Submission isn't about having to do something. It's not about checking off a list. Even just like walking up and like, oh, there's Dave. Let me get my submission out of the way by patting him on the back and saying his hair looks nice. Or, like, it's not compulsory. It's not self-serving. Sometimes I think of the passage where he talks about the Pharisees tithing their dill and their cumin as like this very self-serving or for a show, like this very visible, like, I'm submitting, but really there's a selfish motivation behind it. That's not what we're talking about. Sometimes those things are okay, but if you're trying to get spiritual righteous points, that's not the way of Christ. What is it? It's inspired by intimacy. It's fueled by our connection with God. The only way we'll be able to discern this is the right time, this is the wrong time. In a moment with a unhoused person on the street, is it better to prioritize safety? Is it better to prioritize wisdom? Is it better to talk? Is it better to give to a homeless shelter? There's 100 ways that you might be able to submit in that moment. Knowing which one has to be inspired by intimacy. And then it's done as an act of open-handedness, rooted in love for others. Again, it's not about getting our points or making a show. So here's my homework for all of you for this week. What are some things you could do to practice this? And again, these are examples. You can think about it. 1, ask a trusted friend or a spiritual advisor to help you find an area in your life where they might suggest you could practice submission. This is a trusted person, not a random person. Come up with a step that you could take and see how that works. Number 2, if you have experienced someone abusing their authority to demand submission, consider how you might work through the pain it caused, if you haven't already. Or take time to consider other roadblocks that are stopping you from wanting to embrace this call. 3rd, maybe study examples of those who were willing to sacrifice. In the Bible, you could think about Abraham, who left everything to follow God, or the widow in Luke 21, who gave all she had, 2 mites. What could you learn from them? What might something equivalent be in your life? The last one, pick something you see as necessary and go without it. See how God provides for you. See how the need to get what you want can be eroded a little bit. It's a hard discipline to build, but by being willing to give up something, even for just a short period of time, it can help remind you that it's okay. God provides. In many ways, we need a lot less than what we have. So, if I'd sum everything up, I'd say kind of that first quote from the beginning. Submission is this life that Christ is inviting us to give up the everlasting burden to always get our own way. It isn't easy. It's been done wrong so many ways. But there is a life there. There's the way there that's really at the center of what it means to center your life on Christ. Amen.